everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Patricia Schnall Gutierrez, who has been working in the world of art all her life and is creating the most amazingly experimental, interesting, unexpected pieces of art, each one different than the next. I met Patricia through the All Florida exhibit last spring, and she is a friend of a woman who I know from Miami who was also in the All Florida. That's Marina Font, and she's going to be speaking a month from now. And they're both fascinating people, and they work together with a third person who I haven't yet met. Her name is Rhonda Mitrani, and together they form a collaborative group called the RPM Project, and they're going to be having a show at the Boca Raton Museum in the fall, and all three of them are going to be here again to talk about their collaborative work. So it's going to be very exciting. And it's my pleasure to introduce Patricia, and she will tell you about her life and her work.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for coming. Again, I'm Patricia Schnall Gutierrez. I'm a multimedia artist. I didn't always say that. I used to just be a painter. I'm currently based out of Miami. I have my studio at the Bakehouse Art Complex. And I've been down in South Florida since 2007. My work has to do with issues of femininity. And I have been working in that direction for the past 40 years. It focuses on the exploration of the feminine character through social matters, just personal experiences, and a lot of autobiographical work as I'm looking at the world through a woman's perspective. That is what fuels most of my work. And I thought that the way that I would start the evening off, since I have been an artist all of my life, I thought that I would start off with what my influences were, because there were reasons why I ended up sticking with that theme of the feminine character. I am from Buffalo, New York. This is the Albright Knox Art Museum. And it is, and was by far, the biggest influence in my entire life, other than the fact of some wonderful people that also got involved with me. This particular museum has, if you ever have the chance to go to Buffalo, it has one of the best contemporary art collections in the country, if not the world. So if you can get up there, it's absolutely fabulous. I spent many, 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 many days just wandering around and looking, particularly when I was in college. These were some of the people that I was looking at. I was at the State University of New York at Buffalo in the 70s. I was being trained by some fantastic professors, and we just dove into abstract expressionism. That's what was going on at that point in time, and that's what was interesting to me. My concentration was in painting, and I did my minor studies in philosophy, world religions, and art history. But what prompted all of this really was that a lot of these I don't know if this particular one was, but a lot of the work by these people, this is a William de Kooning, were in the halls of this museum. Another William de Kooning, who always went back and forth with this play with abstraction and figurative work, which I have also done in my life. Robert Rauschenberg, I'm sure you all know who that is also, and these were the first people that influenced me. This is also a Robert Rauschenberg. At the time, I wasn't really looking at installation, but it was interesting for me to see that an abstract expressionist painter ended up doing this, which is what I ended up doing as well. Another Rauschenberg. It was a similar path that I took, you'll see as we get into my work, of not being entirely satisfied just working on the canvas. I felt a need to come off the canvas, and I felt that need for many, many years. I started out when I was exhibiting very early on, bringing ropes and different things off of the canvas, but never settling it properly in my mind. Now this is a piece by Susan Rothenberg. This was a huge step for me because when I was in college, I had wonderful professors, none of which were women. I walked down the halls of the Albright Knox and saw mostly artwork by men. So I started thinking after a while. I was a very rebellious, to put it nicely, young woman. And I thought to myself, what the heck here? Where are all the women? So Susan Rothenberg, the way that I came to know her was that she was a friend of, she was a sister-in-law of a friend of mine. Now, she was a little bit older than I was, so I didn't know her personally. But I started looking at her work because she was a painter. We had something in common. We both were from Buffalo. And I started really, really enjoying her work and seeing that she was starting to get a little bit of recognition in those days. Another Buffalonian, Cindy Sherman. I don't think she was originally from Buffalo, but she was actually my contemporary. We did not know each other either. She went to Buff State. I went to UB. But there's an awful lot that was going on, I think, in both of our lives that our work parallels. I wish I was as accomplished as Cindy Sherman. However, I really think she's an absolutely fantastic artist. And I wanted to put that in there because there are a lot of pieces by her that relate to mine, and she was a great influence on me because I do an awful lot of self-portraits and staged self-portraits. This is Louise Bourgeois, who I did not see. I didn't know of her work in Buffalo, but as I moved on in my career, the fact that she was a woman and a mother and an artist made the most sense to me because I was traveling that same path. There's another one by her, as you can see, the female torso with the small child on top. When I was in Buffalo, I was very aware of the fact that there were just no women anywhere, and I started playing with the whole idea that I could call myself Pat, and no one would know whether I was a man or a woman. And I stopped showing up places and started sending slides and things to people, and sure enough, I got into a couple of galleries, and I ended up getting a one-person show in the Buffalo Convention Center, which was, at that time, not easy to get a one-person show, and I was right out of college. And I showed up. Not only did I show up as a woman, but I showed up, I think, 8 months pregnant, and had the first solo show that I had ever had of my career. And it was fantastic. It was a real highlight. But what happened afterwards to me is that I became a mother shortly after that. And life got a little bit more difficult for me. So it was difficult as trying to make ends meet as a mother and an artist. The galleries suddenly were waning away. And my husband and I had moved to New York because it was a depression in Buffalo and we couldn't stay there any longer. Ellie and I found out we lived very close to each other. You lived in Rockaway, I lived in Howard Beach. And then I moved to New Jersey, had 2 more children, and I was doing no artwork whatsoever. So I took probably 10 to 15 years off of my career to raise my children. As the kids got bigger, I managed to start doing things again. I started teaching as an artist. I opened up my own school, which worked very well when my kids were little. I also opened an art gallery in Piermont, New York, with 3 other artists. And we had a very wonderful, wonderful gallery there. And during that time, I was also going to the studio school. I had met a woman by the name of Susan Laufer, who was an instructor of mine there. We became very good friends. And she was a tremendous influence on my life as well. She was very accomplished already, teaching at the studio school. And I was slowly, as my kids were getting bigger, and now I had 3, and they were getting a little bit bigger and bigger, I was showing again at that point. I had some small galleries in New York and in the vicinity, plus my own gallery. I had a small museum show at that point. And then my kids were finally getting old enough that I said, it's time for me to leave. I was in New Jersey at that point. It's time for me to leave New Jersey. My husband was about to retire. My kids were finished with school, and I said, it's time for me to go. I need to either go back into New York, or I need to go somewhere where I'm in an urban environment and I'm back in the art scene. So New York was too expensive. By the time we left and tried to go back, we couldn't do that. So my husband had family down in Miami, so we decided to look down there. And I had heard that something was cooking in Wynwood. And I said, maybe, I've been out of the art world. I wasn't that enveloped in it. Maybe I could go back there and really start working again as an artist. And that's what we did. And one of the reasons, not only did I put an Ava Hess shot up here on the screen, but I had a very funny incident. When we sold our house, we didn't sell it in a conventional way that we went through a realtor or any. We opened up the doors and invited people in, and these people came into our home, and they fell in love with the house, and I had artwork all around, and she said, "Are you familiar with Ava Hess?" And I said, "Well, of course I've heard of her, but I'm not that familiar with her work." And she said, "Well, your paintings remind me of her early work, her early paintings." And I said, "I never saw her paintings." She said, "Well, my mother was her best friend, and she lives 2 blocks from here." She said, "Would you like to see them?" And I said, "Yes, I would." So I went there, and sure enough, Ava Hess was a painter, just like I was. And I saw that, you know, I started studying some of the work that she did, and I said, she just jumped off that 2-dimensional page and took off very early in her life and was very successful. Unfortunately, it was cut short. But this is a piece that she did, and I wanted to put that in as one of my later influences. Now these pieces, I wanted to start out just because of the fact that I always was a painter. I'm going to go through just several different ones of them here that we can just scroll through. These were pieces that are, some of them are sold, some of them are not. They're old, they're new, but I wanted you to take a look at what that abstract expressionist influence and who those people that we just went through were in these pieces. A fairly new piece, again, that same abstract expressionist. I still paint. I just don't paint exclusively. I still paint because that's generally where I can make a little bit of money. So I am represented by some different people and still paint. A recent one, actually, this accompanied, what I've been doing, a lot of the painting has been accompanying a lot of the other work that I'm doing, the installation work. Another one from that series, It's So Quiet in Here. Some drawings. And you'll see through the drawings, we can scroll through them, where I'm going back and forth with this abstraction, and then I still do a lot of figurative work, and the figurative work, I still enjoy doing it, and I'm still represented by some people that show this. So this is a life-size piece, and it's framed very unusually in an irregular frame. Another one that these were both in art context. And you'll see right after this shot comes, this is where I started using these staged photographs of myself that I had taken over a 15-year period. This was my house in New Jersey, and on the left was my studio, and on the right was my master bedroom. As the kids got bigger, they ended up switching. The master bedroom was quite large, the studio was quite small. The reason that I was always photographing myself in between those 2 doors was because I was always very torn with this mother, housewife / artist identity. And it was very hard for me to juggle these 2 loves in my life. And it always was. It was always very difficult, and I didn't want to give up on either one of them. So I constantly put myself in between these doors, and I was either wrapped up in sheets, I was bound to a chair. I wasn't free to do what I needed to do. Here you can even see that, yes, I felt as if I was losing my own identity because I was stuck between these 2 lives, and I wasn't sure how to be able to live them both. So these 2 photographs are just 2 examples of about maybe 200 that I might have that were taken over a 15-year period at different stages, when I was 40, when I was 45, when I was 50, as I was getting older and the kids were growing up. Then what happened, we moved down to Miami during this whole thing. We left that house, we moved down to Miami, and I asked to come into the bakehouse, and the curator there at the time, her name was Lauren Wagner, and she was a lovely, very talented young woman who was curating the shows there. And I got along with her very well, and I had said to her that I really wanted to branch out into some type of installation. And she said, well, we have the gallery for you. And that's what the bakehouse has done for me. It has been an experimental hub where all of these things that I always really wanted to do in my life, I could go there and try it out. Just see, if, number one, if I could do it. Number two, what the reaction would be to it. So these pieces, if you remember the piece that was just before it, combined the hair, that loss of identity, that, the sheet that was wrapped around. But I'm not in there because I still can't totally figure out who I am. I started playing around with some different materials. This was architectural tracing paper. And I started going back to when I was younger and trying to figure out how I was raised. I came from a family with 2 different religions. This definitely came from the Catholic side of the family with this little procession of little girls. But again, they're empty. There has just been something about my life, I don't know why. I know my poor husband's been trying to figure it out for 38 years. There is an emptiness in there that I have constantly been searching for. This is a piece that I did with another artist who at that time was at the Bakehouse. Her name was Natasha Madaw. We collaboratively worked on this piece. It was called Motherhood. And we incorporated scent in here also. It smelled like lavender. It was a fantastic piece to work on together. The first time I had ever worked with another person on a piece to see what that felt like, so that I got myself out of my studio all on my own. Then I started playing around again with keeping with that on that 2-dimensional surface, however, adding some things to it. This is called Behind Our Tutus. Again, this is another identity piece. And I had decided that women grow up with this. I don't know if any of you remember those little jewelry boxes with the little ballerina going around. And I was also not trained for that many years, but I went to dance school for many years when I was young. So that whole idea of being a ballerina and what it says about women and how we got in that outfit and the expectations that society has on us in these types of outfits that we get ourselves in, it was just always very intriguing to me. So I took photographs and images that I had collected over the years of all different women, everybody from talented writers and artists to people I went to high school with, to my mother, to my best friends. Everyone was in there. And I put some of us in tutus who we were able to let go of that identity and some of us who were not. This piece was, at the time, Michael Culver was the director of the Naples Museum, and he had called me up. And that was the first time I had gotten into a museum exhibit down in Florida. And it was their contemporary, whatever, they look for contemporary artists every year, different ones every year. And that was, I think that was 2009. It was a couple years after I came here. That's just so you can see a detail of it with the tutus. I mean, there's everyone in there. They're literally everyone, teachers, prostitutes, everyone you can imagine is portrayed in that piece. Then after that piece, and I don't even know if it's after, I work on multiple pieces simultaneously. I was playing around again with that architectural tracing paper, and there was something that wonderfully tactile about it, that it was reminding me of something at home, and I wasn't sure if it was like a phyllo dough, but all of those domestic things that we do in the home. So I started just playing around with it and folding it and tying it and going through this methodology of stacking them up like little packages. And I got this idea that I wanted to start inviting other people to come in and do it with me. Why? I'm not sure. I just went with it. And I started asking other artists I knew. Louise Marcus, she's out of Montreal, a painter, and Patricia Sager, who actually is down at the Art Center now. And there were quite a few other. It turned out that so many people started coming to these little sessions that I had, and we would work together at these long tables, and we would spread wax, and we would fold. And it was very methodical how these things had to really be put together. And everyone enjoyed it. That was the strange part about it. Everyone was so enthralled with this piece. And then we started putting notes in them. And I said, because there was an energy that everyone added to the piece, that I said, add a little something to it that you just need to let out into the universe, whatever it is. And I said, they don't need to be signed by any means, just put something in it. So now I was collecting hundreds and hundreds of these. This was, the first time they were out on exhibit was at the Boca Museum. And people were very confused at that point when they were there. They weren't quite sure if they were giveaways or something, I know. And I'm very aware of the fact that some of these things that I do, they're conceptual pieces, are a little on the unusual side. But then they just kept growing. Then I was asked to show them in another venue. They have gone quite a few places. This particular one, this was the second time I had done this. I decided to incorporate a participatory performance to it, where I would sit down and talk to people, and we would go through these mundane chores, domestic chores that women did in the home, but I decided to invite men because I thought, well, that's sort of silly. I mean, men do these chores also, even though they're generally associated with women. So I would do these, and all of these notes kept going into them. Another shot of that, a different person doing that there with me. You'll see them on the left there. This was a different way that I had exhibited them. And my hope, I'm still doing this, and I'm having these performances go on all over, and I will still do some of these group sessions in my studio. My hope is to have an entire very, very big room full of these packages with this cumulative energy from all of these people that have touched them, folded them, tied them, and put little personal thoughts in them. And I'm going to a residency this summer for this particular piece in Key West. And I'll be working with the public down there with it too. So if any of you are interested, please let me know. I will definitely put you on the list. Yes?
What's on the wall?
On the right, that's another piece. Yes, that one's coming up. Another piece that I did with the tracing paper, it's been stiffened. And I worked with it with olive oil and tea. And there were these, I call them pods. And it's as if they've been shown quite a few different places. They're actually on exhibit right now in Fort Lauderdale. It was as if this female skirt form was either diving into or emerging out of the ground. At one of the exhibits that they were in, I had dirt loaded into the entire gallery. It was a very big gallery. And we just placed them on the dirt. And it was pretty awesome. This is on exhibit right now at the projects in Fort Lauderdale. So they come and they go, and they have come out again. That's another painting of mine in the back. Then I had an opportunity at the Bakehouse. There was a juried show coming up, and it was curated by all of the better museums in the South Florida area. I think maybe it was just it was the Frost, it was the MAM at the time, you know, all the ones that were the MoCA. And it was about sin. And I had an experience when I was younger that this was another experiment of mine. You know, I started getting off that two-dimensional surface. I started doing some installation pieces, and I really felt a need, maybe that dancer was coming back out of me or something, to do a performance piece. And I got quite a reaction to this on both sides here, because it was about, well, you'll see what it's about here as you look at it. It was, the way that it was presented in the show was just that rope came down and it was on the stool, and there was a little video that played to the right of it. But at the opening to the show, I did a performance. These are just stills from it, and I actually have a little clip that we can look at. What happened, what prompted me to do this was that I had an experience when I was very young about someone in my family who was threatening to hang themselves. I never realized how it had changed my life. I had gotten over it, but it had left a scar on my life. This was someone very, very important to me. And I felt as if I needed to get it out of my system. So I did this performance. But I did it from a child's point of view. This was a child trying to understand why this person was doing this. And there were elements there that I could see. There was a rope. There was a rafter. There were stairs. And it's difficult for me to talk about it. And this is the video that I did in my studio. So yeah, that was a pretty intense piece when I did that. And it got a lot of reaction from a lot of people that either understood, because more people are touched by suicide than we all like to admit. And yeah, you can have your own reaction to that. So, but I don't always do somber pieces. I occasionally do some that have a little bit more humor in them. And I started playing around with these objects. The chair came back in. The tutu came back in. My arms without the body ended up in this piece, and this sort of phallic pot scrubber in my hands. And this piece I just called Armchair. There are quite a few of these. This is actually the mannequin without its arms. A lot of the pieces that I started doing, pieces started coming to me. They were objects and things that people were discarding, they were getting rid of. And I started looking at them in a very different way and thinking about what materials I would use with them. The material was always very, very important. So I started using a lot of steel wool because of the whole idea that women are constantly cleaning pots, and I've gone through my share of SOS in my life. And the fact that it's a very, very strong material, yes, it's very fragile looking at the same time. So I was very conscious of which materials I was using. The tulle came in again as the tutu, the cotton duck that was tied again at the bottom, and no head again on this piece. But you can look at it a couple of different ways. They became somewhat humorous to me. Again, it's about 80 inches tall. This is all, again, the same material here, and it reminded me of my mother's coat when I was very young. I used to sit next to her, and again, we've got this, and with the braiding going on, very similar, carries through a lot of my work. These are called female forms. Here's another piece. I was in someone's studio and they were moving up to New York, and I saw this old washer wringer, and I was so obsessed with laundry through all of these pieces that I've been doing, because I don't know where that came from exactly. I think that I did most of my thinking when I was in a laundry room, washing these kids' clothes for years. And I thought about the fact that I was brought up that way. My mother was taught how to do the laundry, was taught how to fold everything properly and to put it away and to stack it. And this piece is called Inheritance. And again, it's me in that same hallway. I'm in between those two doors. And the photograph that's on that vellum is fading away as some of those inherited qualities do fade away. But that is a washer wringer. The hair, again, which goes into a lot of my pieces, is incorporated into it. Another piece that I did, and this one, if I can get the title correct, it's dishes, candy, spoons on a shelf. And this was a different way of looking at another participatory piece, but things that are associated with women when we're setting the table and putting things out. It's a different twist on it. I was using something that looked, the Petri dishes and the lab spoons. At the time, the H1N1 virus was going around, and it was curious to me how people were sharing things. And I left this has been in 3 different exhibits so far. And the title of it, all it says are the ingredients of what's there, and that's rock candy. And by the end of the show, people start eating it all. And it's very curious that that happens. Another piece, this one was based on, I had an assistant at the time, and her little daughter was named Diva. And there was something about this, she's a little black girl, and there was something about her that reminded her of me. She had a little attitude going with her. She came into my studio. I photographed a couple hundred photographs of this kid. And she came out in all different pieces. This is one, it's called Body Language. And this was a typewriter. Some of you may recognize this. When I was in high school, it was mandatory that we took typing as women. And because if we were college bound, we had to take typing. That's just the way it was. So this was my typewriter. I don't know if you can see it, but it is. I have thread that's stitched on the letters B-O-D-Y that go up to this little girl who's holding on to herself and has lost her head and trying to figure out her identity. This is her. Diva, again, I did a lot of paintings of her, I showed them up in the Hamptons. Most of them have sold in this series. This one is on exhibit now in that same project space, and this was little Diva. You know, she's lost her face there. And I put her on a blackboard where she was, all of those, you can't really read it on here. It's difficult to even read it in the painting, but you know, I will be a good girl, I will behave, I will do this. And it's all of these rules that we are supposed to abide by, that we were supposed to be as little girls. And I put that Kellogg symbol in there because that was that all-American symbol. Another piece, learned behavior. These are all little divas, little things that I associated with little girls. There were candies in there and flowers. And just a different take on it, what was going on with that learned behavior from the time that we were very young. Just a detail of that piece. You can see the candies in it. This piece has since sold. It's up in New York. And then right around that time, I was still working with the packages, and I had met a woman by the name of Marina Font, and she had come to make these packages with me. And we hit it off, and our work was so similar in so many ways that I approached her at one point, and I said, I have this idea for a performance piece that I want to do, and I need a couple of more women. We sat down, we talked about it. It was laundry-based again. And I said, we need one other woman, and I said, I would really like to incorporate possibly some video into it. And she introduced me to Rhonda Matrani, and this was our first project. It was a 10 by 10 by 15 house. As you can see, the house itself, it was called 2407, The House Inside My Head, and it's how women become the house. They are the main piece of the house. So we had this huge, overflowing amount of hair that was bellowing out of the top of the house, and we wrapped it, you know, we braided it, wrapped it around the house, brought it up to the front door. As you walked into the front door, there was this split screen projection, which I have another detail of this performance. But we also did the performance outside of the house. And we also had an interactive part where we let people write on sheets about different ideas that they were thinking about while they were doing their laundry. This was first out in the Lotus House with Marty Margulies and Constance, and this was to benefit. So they had a Wynwood Art Fair, and this is the first time that this was out in this fair. This is a detail of the performance. That's Marina on the right. Not a wonderful shot of Rhonda in the middle there, and me on the left. And that never-ending, what happened in this is this never-ending laundry that we kept doing. As they're folding the laundry, it's coming back to me, it's getting thrown on the pile, and I'm doing it all over again. And it's just, it turned into like a clock of time. And years went by of doing the same pieces. And in this piece, I don't have it with me, unfortunately, but when we come back as RPM, I'm sure we'll bring it, is audio of women in the background thinking and what their thoughts are when they're doing their laundry. And that is a very large component of this piece, which hopefully one day you'll be able to see. This is the split screen, where there were sheets hanging inside that house and the images were shown. So it was fantastic to work with these two other women. With the three of us came together, and it was just amazing what three creative minds can come up with. So that was very, very satisfying. Great shot of our laundry here that never seemed to go away. Then we did another project, and this was called Anne Marie Was Here. It was inspired by an article that I had read in the Atlantic magazine about why women still can't do it all. And this was the epitome of my life. So I read this article, and it was by Emery Slaughter, who I don't know if you remember, but she was working with Hillary Clinton in the State Department. And her son, she was living in Washington working, and her son back in New Jersey in Princeton was having some difficulties in high school or something, and she felt extremely torn, left her job, went home. Well, since then, the whole thing went on fire. But what we decided to do was to turn this table into the women coming together and talking about how they're juggling their lives. So there's the CEO on one end, there's the stay-at-home mom, and then there's these three jugglers in between. And we had just set this up like a tea with all of these goodies on the table. Again, it's interactive. In this middle chair right here, the viewer is invited to sit and join the table. There's an iPad there where they can join in the conversation, and then there's a mirror across, so they're seeing themselves literally in the entire piece. So That's been out a couple of times. At the moment, it's not really anywhere, but hopefully it will be coming out again soon. But it's still going on. You can still go on our website, RPM Project, and you can join in that discussion, which is fun. Just some more details. You can see the iPad that we have set up there. This was in Art Winwood last year. And here's that piece that you were asking about. This was inspired after my daughter-in-law had my first grandchild. And it was this entire process of we as women, as these vessels, and who we are, our essential nature, over and beyond all of these things that we're doing every day and our problems and our juggling. I went back to who we really are. And this was just, this has audio in this piece. And it is about all of these parts of a woman, whether it's menstruation, whether it's childbirth, and that belly of where we hold life. In this particular piece, it's a 14-foot drain, and there are 4 speakers in there. So as you walk down, and it's very abstracted, but as you walk down, my hope is that you get the sense of this belly of the woman and this dripping of life that we constantly have. This is another piece that was taken from that one, that woman's body. That I started getting into this wanting to work with, or this association with women and our essential nature as just animals and who we were just as humans. And I started buying wools and all different types of wools and braiding them, and somehow with that association with hair and animals, and this particular piece has all these different components. In those little boxes are cocoons that I had made. There's water in there, and there's a sketchbook of all of these sketches of all of these things that I had done. I have many, 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 I wouldn't say hundreds, but many sketchbooks, and of all these drawings that I do for all of these installation ideas. And this particular book had all of these drawings of me in that hallway with this hair and all of this stuff going on. Again, this was sort of just a funny piece that I did. It's called Herd, and it was, again, just almost forgetting about all of the other things other than the fact that we really are just female. But over and beyond that a little bit, I started working with just legs of women. So there's a couple of different components that came in here. The legs as sexual objects, number one, as opposed to typical sexual objects. And the fact that how other people may view us as women, or sometimes how we view ourselves. Another experiment. I went back to those photographs and I started playing around with them and digitally playing with them on my computer. And this is what I came up with. It was this explosion of something that I'm trying to still come up with this identity of who I am. And there's a couple of different ones. This is called Flower Girl 1 and 2. The next one is Black Smoke and White Smoke. And a lot of different things came into this. I've always had this feeling that there's always this goodness, and I don't know if I would call it evil, but sort of good and bad in all of us. And in both of these pieces, I had that feeling where it was either the dark smoke, or maybe it's depression, or maybe it's just negativity. And then there was the lightness, which was the same in the other pair that I had up there. This one was the one that was in the museum that some of you may have seen. Once again, I put them all together. I work in multiples, as you've probably noticed, a lot of multiples. I like to get my point across through multiples. This was going back to when I was younger, that it's called Self-Portraits with Polka Dots. And polka dots, for me, were always happy things. And there was something on the surface that no matter what was going wrong underneath, there were these happy polka dots on the surface. And I don't know if it was these polka dot dresses or these songs that we grew up with when we were younger. But I looked at them as happiness, but it was a facade. So here's this woman trying to deal with her identity, and there's these happy polka dots on the surface, and then she's lost herself in that last one there. Just the polka dots remained. a little bit more of a fun piece. This was a piece that I had done last year that was in the design district, and this is called Restless. And this is just all of these dresses that are strung by safety pins and string. And it was somewhere in between the restless feeling of not being able to get to where I want to be in my life and just being in a discotheque and dancing it out. So somewhere in there. And the funny thing is that this exhibit was part of the nightclub series. I don't know if you've heard of this that goes on there. It has nothing to do with a nightclub, but somehow just that word alone reminded me of the 80s and the nightclubs. So that got into this, but the feeling of that restlessness was still in there. This is one of the later pieces that I have done. This is done missing. This is a social documentary on female feticide. There are hundreds and hundreds of these. They are garbage bags filled with other plastic bags and shower hooks. And I had read an article about the millions upon millions of female fetuses that are destroyed every year because they're female, and for no other reason other than the fact that they are female. So this is causing, number one, it's the most primary injustice to the female gender. Plus, it's causing all sorts of problems in societies to this disproportionate number of male to female. So I decided to come up with this piece that was about these aborted female fetuses and trying to come up with this ethereal look of maybe something beautiful that they could have been, but how awful this process really is. And it goes on today, and it has not stopped. It's gotten better, but it continues. It continues. There is also a website, and it's called itsagirlmovie.com. And if you're interested in finding out more information, you can go on to that website. It's disturbing, but interesting at the same time. And there's just, you can see what a detail of that piece. This past summer, I started a new series about bedtime stories. It was about diving into our subconscious as women and things that stay with us over the years. And this, again, I started taking photographs of my bed and superimposing different things on them, stories and memories. And we spend a third of our life in bed. And as I was approaching a very significant age, I started thinking, oh, dear Lord, I've been in bed for 20 years. What have I been doing there? So it was a combination of, I dealt with everything. And I started thinking about what was going on in my memories and my dreams and my sexual experiences. So that's how this began. This one, I wish I could remember. I don't remember the titles to all of these. But this was that, it's as if someone were there, but they're gone. And that was that feeling that I was trying to portray in this one. This one is a story about a memory I had, a sexual memory I had when I was very young. And it says, the sheets were stained from a previous lover. It lasted for a week, maybe two. I tasted his mouth for months. And it was when I was very young and I had met a very young man that had made a huge impression on my life. And it was something that stayed with me forever. And I just thought that I would add that to some of those things that happened during those times. I started doing all different pieces associated with those memories in bed. Again, I'm back to putting things together in multiples, playing around with it, the legs as sexual objects. This is another detail of that one piece. This is about an experience about rape. And it was an experience that happened to me when I was younger, and it was just, it was as if I had spray painted it onto the sheets. And I started putting together a lot of collage work, thinking about different dreams that I had had. And as we finish off this talk today, you'll see that I have always had these reoccurring dreams in my life where I'm trying to get somewhere and I can't get there. So I'm constantly looking at my legs. I'm trying to get, it's all of these things going on with my legs. So it's this personal thing. I know some other people have this experience also. I don't know what that means exactly, but this particular one is called Erased in the Wash. This is directly a piece about being raped. And I won't get too much into the specifics about it other than the fact that the sheets were washed afterwards. There are only 3 components to this piece. It is 200 feet of washing machine hose. It's a very distorted sound of a combination of machines, washing machines, and whispers. Very abstracted though, and it sort of beckons the viewer to come closer and to listen what I have to say. Because 1 in 3 women are raped to this day, and it's very rarely talked about, and it's a problem in all societies. And this was my way of just being able to say my little part of it. You may not understand exactly what's going on when you're walking up to it, but once you know the story behind it, you'll hear that there's people trying to wash these memories away of things that have happened in beds. This is also on exhibit, by the way, if you want to see it, and there's an opening Saturday at the projects in Fort Lauderdale, and this piece is on exhibit there with the audio and everything, if you'd like to see it. This is where it appears as if the sound is coming out of these fittings here. And this is the last piece that I'm going to be talking about today. Again, it's about this bedtime stories series that I did. And this is called Sleepwalk. It's projected down onto folded sheets again. And it's about this dream, this reoccurring dream that I have about walking and trying to get somewhere and just not able to get there. And again, this is projected. It's not normally projected like this. It's projected on sheets, so it actually looks like the sheets are moving, which is kind of fun. And then it has a very different look when you're looking down on these sheets. It looks a little bit differently. So that's the end of this. I also have, if any of you are interested, there's another piece to that series. And I'm doing an installation where I like to get the public involved. So I've brought some of these pieces. I'm actually making a mattress out of thousands of pieces of this. And I'm asking people to write an anonymous, by the way, anonymous story of an experience that they've had in bed. And I'll be sewing them all together. And this will be a mattress that will be a full-size mattress. Ask me why I know this. Happens to be 54 by 75 because one of my jobs when I didn't have much money was in a bed store. So there's a funny correlation between this. But the fact that I'll be putting all of these stories together in this mattress, and it will not ever stop growing. It will just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. So pretty much like the package project, where I'm getting this energy and these stories and this collectiveness from everyone that can be a part of this piece, which makes it that much more interesting to me and hopefully more interesting to everybody else. So that's it.